Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. The book we're interpreting for you in this issue is the classic American detective novel of the 20th century, The Long Goodbye. The Long Goodbye was written by the renowned American author Raymond Chandler, born in 1888 and passed away in 1959. His primary creative period spanned from the 1930s to the 1950s. The Long Goodbye is his penultimate full-length work and is considered his most significant achievement. In the realm of detective fiction, Raymond Chandler is undoubtedly a figure of high regard. As one of the pioneers of hard-boiled detective fiction, Chandler made outstanding contributions to establishing this genre's prominent status in the detective fiction world. Today, within the detective fiction domain, hard-boiled detective fiction has become one of the major subgenres alongside the classical style. However, during Chandler's early writing years, readers were more accustomed to the classical detective fiction typified by Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes series. The distinction between the two lies in that classical detective fiction primarily focuses on the process of deduction, describing crime methods, criminal psychology, and motives. It's akin to a mental game, with the reader's enjoyment derived from the puzzle-solving process, while character development and societal context are not central to the writing. Hard-boiled detective fiction is quite different. As the name implies, hard-boiled describes the detective's persona, distinct from the gentlemanly image represented by characters like Holmes in classical detective fiction. The hard-boiled detective doesn't wear a three-piece suit and doesn't sit in a study smoking a cigar while pondering the case. Of course, as a form of detective fiction, hard-boiled stories still involve murder, but the emphasis shifts away from the process of deduction. Detectives are still present and apply their intellect and courage to solve cases, but they are no longer allies or consultants of the police. In simpler terms, Chandler aimed to write detective fiction that felt like real-life events and depicted detectives as if they could be people you might know in reality. However, Chandler's greatness extends beyond this. Although he specialized in detective fiction, his influence transcended the boundaries of genre writers, gaining recognition from academia and fellow authors. Even across the Pacific and Japan, Chandler's impact remains substantial. The well-known Japanese author Haruki Murakami, who has almost won the Nobel Prize in Literature multiple times, regards Chandler as his idol and dreams of producing a work similar to The Long Goodbye. At least up to now, he hasn't achieved that, so he took a circuitous route and translated The Long Goodbye into Japanese. Chandler's acclaim stems not only from his well-crafted, multidimensional characters and coherent storytelling but also from his critique of America's judicial system, police corruption, and exploration of society's darker aspects. Moreover, he delves into the complexities and contradictions of human nature. Unlike typical detective fiction where the line between good and bad is distinct, and good and evil are starkly juxtaposed, Chandler shows us that villains can perform acts of kindness, and good people have shadows within them. The boundary between good and evil isn't clearly demarcated but interconnected. The Long Goodbye tells the story of good people doing bad things, akin to an analogy that might not be entirely appropriate. This novel is reminiscent of ancient Greek tragedies that deliberately destroy valuable things for people to witness, enabling a deeper examination of one's life and destiny, and providing a dual sense of spiritual and aesthetic satisfaction. So, without further ado, let's quickly delve into the specifics of what this novel entails. In simple terms, The Long Goodbye revolves around the murder of a wealthy young woman, and the central theme of the novel unfolds around the question of who is the murderer. As a detective novel, murder and investigation remain focal points in the depiction of The Long Goodbye. However, what sets it apart from typical detective fiction is its exceptional approach, which goes beyond the mere portrayal of murder and solving the case, as we'll gradually explore. Similar to Chandler's previous full-length works, The Long Goodbye continues the narrative perspective through the lens of the protagonist, Detective Marlowe. While this perspective might appear commonplace nowadays, it represented a significant innovation in Western literature during the 20th century. Before this, the most common narrative perspective in Western literature was the omniscient and omnipresent God perspective, where the narrator is everywhere and knows everything, making it well suited for grand historical narratives. However, when applied to detective fiction, this approach inherently presents a logical paradox. If the narrator knows everything, why not reveal the identity of the murderer right from the beginning? In contrast, Chandler's use of Marlowe's perspective provides a certain convenience. Through the detective's eyes, readers gain information at the same pace as him, enabling them to immerse themselves in the story, even making their own judgments and deductions based on existing information, experiencing the sensation of being a detective, a significant source of enjoyment when reading detective novels. As early as his first full-length work in 1930, Chandler established the narrative mode of storytelling through Marlowe's perspective. By the time of The Long Goodbye, Chandler had perfected this technique, resulting in a meticulously crafted puzzle-like structure. The book can roughly be divided into 5 parts, with seemingly loose connections between each part. However, upon completing the entire book, readers realize that seemingly disconnected plot elements seamlessly interlock, similar to a jigsaw puzzle. Just like in a puzzle game, once the correct correspondences are found, seemingly unrelated fragments eventually fit together harmoniously. This achievement is made possible because of the limitations imposed by Marlowe's perspective. Readers can only follow in his footsteps, gradually discovering different aspects of the events, until Marlowe himself acquires all the information. Only then can readers, alongside the detective, piece together these fragments into a coherent picture. The first 10 chapters of the novel constitute the most central puzzle pieces, as they contain several crucial questions. Before unveiling these questions, let's take a look at what the first 10 chapters depict. The story takes place on a night in October or November, outside a club in Los Angeles. Our protagonist, Private Detective Marlowe, encounters a drunkard in the parking lot. This drunkard is named Lennox, with white hair, a stiff and pale right side of his face, and faint scars. Despite this, he still appears youthful and even handsome. Lennox is heavily intoxicated, rendering him immobile, yet he remains surprisingly coherent and displays an uncommon level of politeness. However, his female companion abandons him, driving away alone and leaving Lennox slumped on the ground. For some inexplicable reason, Marlowe takes Lennox to his residence, provides him with coffee and a blanket, and later escorts him back to his apartment. During their interaction, they exchange only their names without engaging in extensive conversation. Approximately a month later, Marlowe once again encounters Lennox on the street. Lennox is once more heavily intoxicated, and when he's on the verge of being taken into custody by the police as a vagrant, Marlowe intervenes to help him. Subsequently, the two engage in conversation. It turns out that the person who deserted Lennox on the previous occasion is his ex-wife, Sylvia, who is not only young and beautiful but also immensely wealthy. However, Lennox himself is destitute, unable to afford the fare to Las Vegas to join his friend. In response, Marlowe gives him $100. Marlowe's third encounter with Lennox takes place in March of the following year. By then, Lennox has reconciled with Sylvia and undergone a transformation. He dresses stylishly, behaves appropriately, and is no longer the penniless drunkard from before. Over the next 2 or 3 months, they occasionally go out for a drink together. Most of the time, they visit a bar called Victor's and enjoy a cocktail called gin sling. In Los Angeles, a gin sling is made by mixing gin with either lime or lemon juice, whereas in England, it's a blend of equal parts gin and Rose's lime juice. In the context of the novel, this detail isn't a crucial investigative element. At most, it serves as Lennox's recollection of his British past. However, later, we learn that Lennox's attitude toward his memories plays a pivotal role in shaping his destiny. During their drinking and storytelling sessions, Lennox informs Marlowe that Sylvia is the daughter of a millionaire who once dominated San Francisco. She is both wealthy and promiscuous, having been married 5 times, excluding her 2 marriages to Lennox. Their marriage serves as a facade for Sylvia to create an image of integrity and respectability in society. Marlowe gradually grows tired of Lennox incessantly discussing his own predicaments, preferring the version of Lennox who is intoxicated. Their final encounter occurred on a clear morning in June. Lennox suddenly appeared at Marlowe's residence, informing him that Sylvia had been murdered and that he needed to flee. Lennox requested Marlowe to drive him away. Logically, someone fleeing the day after their spouse is murdered would be strongly suspected of the crime. Nonetheless, Marlowe complied. His sole reason for doing so was his judgment that Lennox wasn't the one who killed Sylvia. This action was undoubtedly provocative, and as expected, shortly after Marlowe dropped Lennox off at his place, the police arrived at Marlowe's door. Marlowe's refusal to cooperate angered the police, resulting in him being taken to the police station, where he was treated to a meal of pork fried with bamboo shoots. Later, he was transferred to a detention facility, enduring 3 days of jail food. 3 days later, news arrived that Lennox had committed suicide out of fear, leaving behind a handwritten confession. Consequently, the police closed the case, and Marlowe's stint behind bars came to an end. Throughout this segment, Chandler presents us with numerous questions, with the primary ones being these three. Why did Marlowe repeatedly come to Lennox's aid? Why did Lennox divorce and remarry Sylvia? Did Lennox kill Sylvia? The latter two questions will be explored further as we continue following Marlowe's investigations. For now, let's focus on the first question. It's quite puzzling why Marlowe, who often prides himself as a hard-boiled individual, would show such concern for a heavily intoxicated drunkard. This behavior seems rather unconventional. It's worth noting that in the 1950s, the United States experienced rapid economic growth, resulting in significantly improved living standards compared to the pre-World War II era. As the economy recovered, hedonism gradually became a prevailing mindset among American youth. Additionally, the repeal of the Prohibition in 1933, which had significantly impacted American societal and moral values in the previous 3 decades, meant that by the 1950s, people could indulge in alcohol without legal or moral restrictions. In this social context, in a city like Los Angeles, where many likely got heavily intoxicated at nightclubs, it's unlikely that Marlowe would pay special attention to someone in this state. Marlowe frequently highlights Lennox's politeness. At first glance, this doesn't seem to be an exceptionally rare trait, something that most people should possess. However, when it comes to a drunkard, such politeness becomes more notable. It implies that this individual can maintain their dignity and principles even in extreme circumstances, whether drunk or sober, impoverished or affluent, humble or noble. This mirrors the concept of nobility in poverty espoused by ancient thinkers. Curiously, Marlowe shares this characteristic. When discussing Marlowe's character, many critics often use the word noble. This isn't due to Marlowe being a moral paragon or a heroic figure. Rather, it stems from his tenacity and adherence to justice, conscience, and other qualities beneath his veneer of defiance, irreverence, and colorful language. This steadfastness has earned Marlowe the label of noble, but at times, it comes at an economic cost, physical suffering, or, in the worst scenarios, even jeopardizes his life. Returning to the societal atmosphere of 1950s America, apart from the prevailing hedonism, cynicism was also a prevalent cultural mindset, an approach that focused on weighing pros and cons without considering right or wrong. Put simply, it was a worldly attitude. Regardless of whether it was Marlowe or Lennox, this sense of worldliness was not inherent in them. Otherwise, why would Lennox divorce the wealthy Sylvia and reduce himself to destitution? It was precisely due to this characteristic that Marlowe repeatedly extended his help to Lennox and even considered him a confidant, though Marlowe himself would never admit it. For someone who prided himself on being a hard-boiled individual, terms like confidant or qualities like justice, conscience, and steadfastness undoubtedly came across as overly sentimental. Marlowe's skeptical stance on the case stirred dissatisfaction among many, leading to warnings from both sides of the law. Lennox, the person at the center of the case, even sent him a letter from afar. Of course, it was written before his suicide by gunshot, imploring Marlowe not to dig any deeper. However, these events only deepened Marlowe's suspicions. The story then transitions into the search for Roger segment. Roger is a famous best-selling author who recently developed a drinking problem, frequently getting himself heavily intoxicated and occasionally disappearing for a few days to attend a rehab clinic for his alcohol addiction. Roger's wife, Eileen, seeks out Marlowe, hoping he can locate Roger. It's worth mentioning that Eileen is an incredibly captivating woman. To what extent? In Marlowe's words, she's a dream. Such a task doesn't pose a challenge for Marlowe. Seasoned detectives like him tend to have a few tricks up their sleeves. Marlowe utilizes his connections, narrows down 3 rehab clinics, and after a bit of effort, successfully brings Roger back home. During the ride back, Marlowe learns that the Rogers and the Lennoxes are neighbors who share some social interactions. This connection finally links back to the main plot of the novel. To be honest, without this detail, when reading this section, you might easily feel as though you're reading an entirely different book. After all of Chandler's novels feature Marlowe as the main character. Subsequently, Chandler inserts a chapter titled A Digression, describing Marlowe's daily work. It's mundane, trivial, the minutiae of everyday life. Perhaps it's these details that soften Marlowe's hardened exterior, leading him to an unexpected sense of melancholy. He recalls Lennox's letter, where Lennox asked him to go to Victor's bar and have a gin sling on his behalf. Marlowe willingly obliges. With this, the third part of the novel unfolds, and the 2 main couples, Lennox's and Rogers, are more closely intertwined, revealing the rough contours of the puzzle. At Victor's bar, Marlowe coincidentally encounters Sylvia Lennox's sister, Linda, further confirming the social interactions between the Lennox and Rogers couples. Through Linda's connections, Marlowe also meets the common father of Sylvia and Linda, an infamous millionaire. The millionaire informs Marlowe that Sylvia was shot by Lennox. Marlowe notices that the millionaire doesn't actually hold much affection for his daughter Sylvia. He might not genuinely believe that Lennox is the killer either, but presenting this explanation safeguards the family's reputation and preserves their private lives, preventing the incident from escalating into a bigger scandal. Therefore, he leverages his influence to prompt a swift closure of the case by the police. This also keeps the case away from media scrutiny, with many of the warnings Marlowe received likely originating from the millionaire himself. On the other hand, as Marlowe gets further involved with the Rogers couple, he discovers that Roger was also one of Sylvia's lovers. His recent alcoholism stems from knowing the truth behind Sylvia's death. This truth fills him with anxiety and profound guilt, challenging his conscience and moral boundaries. Consequently, he resorts to numbing himself with alcohol to attain temporary peace of mind. As for Roger's beautiful wife, Eileen, she is fully aware of her husband's relationship with Sylvia, yet she seems indifferent. She is immersed in memories of the past, harboring love for someone else. At this point, we witness a relatively uncomplicated love quadrangle. Based on simple permutations, one might speculate that Roger is the true murderer of Sylvia, while Lennox is Eileen's lingering old flame. However, this assumption only holds true for the latter half. Lennox indeed is Eileen's former lover. They got married in England, with Lennox using a false identity. It was during World War II when Lennox was serving in the military. The army prohibited soldiers from getting married, so he couldn't use his real name. Subsequently, Lennox was captured during a battle and lost contact. Eileen assumed he had been killed by the Nazis. After the war, Eileen returned to the United States and eventually married Roger. With this background, it becomes evident why Lennox divorced Sylvia and later remarried her. The situation can be summarized as follows. Lennox survived the war, underwent reconstructive surgery due to injuries, which resulted in facial scars. Upon returning to the United States, Lennox was penniless and lost contact with Eileen. Through a twist of fate, he met and married Sylvia. In affluent neighborhoods, social interaction is a major theme, and the Lennox couple inevitably had interactions with their neighbors. This brought Lennox unexpectedly back into contact with Eileen. However, circumstances had changed, and the past couldn't be recaptured. Although Eileen and Roger's marriage outwardly seemed dignified and harmonious, Lennox lost his reason to win back his old love. In such a scenario, Lennox's mindset must have been conflicted, watching his beloved with another, a feeling that surely brought discomfort. Yet, he still wanted to see Eileen, even if it was just a passing encounter in social settings. Therefore, Lennox's divorce and remarriage to Sylvia were driven by the internal turmoil of wanting to see Eileen yet not wanting to see her, encapsulating his conflicting emotions. As for the true culprit, it's not who we initially thought, Roger, but rather his wife, Eileen. Sylvia Lennox's sister, Linda, had previously mentioned to Marlowe that Sylvia took away 2 men from Eileen, which likely served as the primary motive for Eileen's crime. After shooting Sylvia, Eileen used a bronze statue to brutally mutilate her face, a gesture that seems driven by a deep-seated hatred and little else. As for Roger, he might have been intoxicated at the time of the incident, but not to the extent of being unsure if he fired a gun. Similar to Lennox, he deeply loves Eileen, and his decision to help Eileen cover up the crime comes at the cost of tormenting his own conscience. This torment intensifies over time, pushing him to the brink of losing self-control. Eileen fears that he might eventually expose the truth to the public, prompting another murder to unfold in the story. Initially, Eileen's killing of Sylvia could be considered a crime of passion, whereas her murder of Roger constitutes premeditated murder. She even stages the scene to make it look like a suicide. The details of Eileen's plan and how Marlowe eventually uncovers the truth are left as a suspenseful element for readers to discover. Although The Long Goodbye doesn't focus primarily on the process of deduction and falls into the category of detective fiction that isn't easily spoiled, the clever twists and turns will provide a more satisfying experience when you read it yourself. Did Lennox know that Eileen was the murderer? Not necessarily. He only knew that Roger and Sylvia were meeting on the night of the incident. For him, it wasn't crucial to determine which of them was the murderer, as either of their convictions would have a significant impact on Eileen's respectable life. Bearing the blame, pretending to flee out of fear, was the only thing he could do to protect Eileen. After Marlowe reveals the truth of the case, Eileen leaves behind a confession letter and subsequently commits suicide. In the hands of a less skilled author, this story might have followed the typical femme fatale pattern. Chandler, however, takes a different approach. He doesn't portray Eileen as a villain. Instead, he treats her with profound sympathy. Similarly, Chandler's attitude extends to Roger and Lennox. Their actions are driven by love. Unlike authors who glorify love, Chandler tries to unearth the destructive power that love can hold. Love can drive human nature towards darkness, leading individuals to abandon the boundaries of conscience, morality, and justice, ultimately resulting in destructive behavior. In the final part of the novel, Chandler has Marlowe publicize Eileen's confession letter through the media, indirectly criticizing the corruption within the American police force. This section also intertwines Marlowe's romantic involvement with Linda, Sylvia's sister. It appears that getting involved with a beautiful woman has become a kind of routine task that Marlowe carries out in every novel. Although Marlowe's romantic connection with Linda may feel somewhat abrupt, it gives birth to one of the most famous quotes in The Long Goodbye. He needed a drink. I needed a lot of life insurance. What we both needed was a vacation. We laughed. Chandler used this quote to describe Marlowe's feelings as he bids farewell to Linda. The bitterness of life seems to be encapsulated in moments like these, where the people, events, and things you hold dear slowly slip away. These departures occur not amidst grand events that shake the world, but rather in a hug, a wave, or a turn of the back. Many times, you might not even realize it, and even if you do, you can only experience the full range of emotions alone. However, to look at it from another angle, it's death that gives meaning to farewells, just as loss lends value to what we possess. Hence, we should celebrate the finite nature of life, otherwise, life would lose much of its color. In the novel's conclusion, Lennox returns from the dead and makes another appearance, explaining to Marlowe the details of his escape from police pursuit in Mexico. Throughout the narrative, Chandler has strategically planted numerous clues and hints, making Lennox's return less surprising than it might seem. In fact, this plot twist, much like Marlowe's romantic involvement with Linda, responds to the dual meaning of the novel's title, The Long Goodbye. Lennox's feigned flight out of fear and the severance of all ties with his past constitute a form of farewell. Marlowe's process of investigating the case is also a kind of farewell. As he uncovers more and more truths, his understanding of Lennox deepens, Yet the Lennox he originally knew, someone steadfast and principled despite his humble background and poverty, gradually drifts away from him. It's no wonder some critics say that while Marlowe seems to be solving the case, he's actually prolonging the resolution, perhaps not wanting to bid farewell to the initial impression he had of Lennox too quickly. Thus, when the identity-switch Lennox bids his final farewell to Marlowe, Marlowe says to him, "You're not really here anymore. You've been gone a long time." For Marlowe, the true Lennox had already departed when he took that final shot of whiskey. At this point in the story, we can finally grasp the dual meanings that the long goodbye embodies: a tangible level of drawn-out farewells among the characters and an abstract level concerning the concept of goodbye in life itself. As mentioned before when discussing the quote, "A farewell is necessary before you can meet again," this novel explores the inevitability of parting ways with things you hold dear in life, whether it's a specific object, a person, or a memory. The process may be lengthy, but farewells are an inevitable outcome. In recounting the story, we have gradually touched upon Chandler's style and the writing characteristics of The Long Goodbye. Now, let's summarize from a technical standpoint why Chandler is considered a master of detective fiction and how his influence extends beyond the realm of genre literature. This is primarily due to, firstly, the novel's structure is exceptionally ingenious. The story unfolds from Marlowe's perspective, and the reading process resembles solving a jigsaw puzzle. It maintains suspense without excessively immersing readers in the plot. The author intends for readers to notice the critiques of societal phenomena beyond the case and the meticulous portrayal of human complexity. These are the aspects Chandler excels at and wants to convey the most. Secondly, the character development is remarkably on point. As the central figure in Chandler's series of novels, Detective Marlowe's tough guy image is already well known to readers. His witty retorts and clever metaphors effortlessly flow from his lips, providing readers with immense reading pleasure. For the other characters in the novel, Chandler consistently manages to outline their personalities and psyches through subtle gestures, expressions, or a few simple lines of dialogue, leaving a lasting impression. Furthermore, Chandler's conscious artistic pursuit deserves applause. His novels go beyond depicting the process of solving a case. They carry a strong undercurrent of social critique and profound empathy for human nature. In The Long Goodbye, it's easy to discern a microcosm of 1950s American society. In terms of human nature, Chandler seeks to unearth the destructive power inherent in love, guiding us to reconsider the boundaries between love and hate, goodness and evil. While love has traditionally been praised positively, it can also lead to destructive outcomes, thereby offering a more intricate and dialectical interpretation of the fragility of human nature. Lastly, it's important to note the connection between the author's personal experiences and his writing style. When Chandler was writing The Long Goodbye, his wife was seriously ill. Unfortunately, his wife passed away before the novel could be completed. Her death had a profound impact on Chandler's psyche, which is reflected throughout the novel. From beginning to end, The Long Goodbye is shrouded in an atmosphere of sadness and repression, possibly serving as a reflection of the author's state of mind during the creative process. Alright, this concludes our analysis for this session. Let's take a moment to review the key points of today's content. Firstly, Raymond Chandler is one of the pioneers of hard-boiled detective fiction and is still regarded as one of the genre's most accomplished writers. His work The Long Goodbye stands as both his representative piece and a pinnacle of the hard-boiled style. Secondly, the hallmark of hard-boiled detective fiction lies in its strong connection to reality, and its profound depiction of human nature. In The Long Goodbye, Chandler continues to satirize the American justice system and offers analysis and critique of societal issues like police corruption. This breadth and depth enable the novel to transcend the conventional confines of detective fiction, elevating it to the realm of literary classics. Thirdly, on a technical level, Chandler continues his tradition of employing a first-person narrative in his novels, creating a sense of reader immersion. Additionally, in The Long Goodbye, his use of a puzzle-like structure gives the appearance of a loosely woven narrative that is, in fact, intricately interconnected. Numerous hints and foreshadowing elements provide readers with a lingering contemplation even after completing the entire book. Lastly, Chandler's unique insights into human nature are worth acknowledging. He acknowledges the complexity of human nature, avoiding clear-cut depictions of good and evil characters and refraining from adopting a preachy tone. In The Long Goodbye, he endeavors to unearth the destructive power of love, enveloping the narrative in a pervasive atmosphere of melancholy and repression, imbued with a strong sense of tragedy. While love is often praised positively, Chandler highlights its potential for ruin, resulting in a more comprehensive and dialectical interpretation of human frailty. It is this artistic pursuit that lends Chandler's novels a grander scope, a deeper meaning, and naturally, a higher literary value. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.